What if the South won the Civil War? The terrifying alternate history that changes everything, the American Civil War, remains the defining trauma of the United States. A bloody struggle that determined the morality, geography, and future of a superpower. But what if the coin had flipped? What if General Robert E. Lee had triumphed at Gettysburg, or if British intervention had forced the Union to the negotiating table? The scenario of a Confederate victory is not just a fantasy for novelists. It is a terrifying geopolitical puzzle that would have fundamentally altered the last 150 years of human history. To understand this alternate timeline, we must first accept that a Southern victory likely does not mean the South conquering the North. It means a successful secession. It means the establishment of the Confederate States of America, CSA, as a sovereign nation sharing a massive, militarized border with the United States of America, USA. This single change triggers a domino effect that topples empires and rewrites the map of the modern world. The survival of slavery and the caste system. Most immediate and harrowing question concerns the institution of slavery. The Confederacy was explicitly founded on the preservation of slavery. In this alternate timeline, the Emancipation Proclamation becomes a toothless document, a footnote in failed Union history. However, historians debate how long chattel slavery would have persisted in its 1860 form. While the CSA would have fought to keep it, international pressure would have been suffocating. Britain and France, vital trading partners for Southern cotton, had already abolished slavery. To maintain economic alliances, the CSA might have been forced into a slow, begrudging transition. This would not be freedom. It would likely evolve into a rigid, constitutionally protected system of serfdom and apartheid, far more severe than the historical Jim Crow laws. We might have seen a manumission by purchase system, where freedom could be bought but citizenship denied. By the 20th century, as mechanization arrived, the economic need for human field labor would decrease, but the racial hierarchy would have been cemented into the very DNA of the new nation. The CSA would likely remain a pariah state in the eyes of liberal democracies, akin to apartheid-era South Africa, clinging to oppressive systems well into the modern era. The North American Cold War, with the continent split in two, the United States would not have become the isolationist industrial giant we know. Instead, the USA and CSA would have been locked in a perpetual state of tension. North American Cold War, starting in the 1870s. The Ohio and Potomac rivers would become arguably the most heavily fortified border zone. Both nations would spend ruinous amounts of money on standing armies. The USA, bitter and revanchist, would likely align itself closer to the Germanic states. Historically, many German immigrants fought for the Union, while the CSA would rely heavily on alliances with Britain and France to ensure their sovereignty. Against northern aggression, this rivalry would spark constant proxy wars over the expansion into the West. Who gets the Colorado Territory? Who controls the access to the Pacific? It is entirely possible that the United States would fracture further, perhaps seeing a Republic of California break away. Unwilling to be dragged into the quarrels of the East, a concept of manifest destiny would die, replaced by a balkanized North America. World War I, the Great Reversal. Most catastrophic change occurs in 1914. In our timeline, the entry of a unified United States in 1917 tipped the scales for the Allies. In this alternate history, North America is a powder keg. If war breaks out in Europe, the alliances shift dramatically. The CSA, owing its existence to British and French support, would likely support the Allies. The USA, seeing Britain as an enemy ally of the South, might remain strictly neutral or, in a darker twist, align with the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. Imagine a scenario where the USA invades Canada to strike at the British Empire, while the CSA attacks the USA from the south. This draws the trench warfare of Europe onto American soil. Without the massive industrial output of a unified America supporting Britain, and with the USA potentially aiding Germany, the Central Powers have a very real chance of winning the Great War. The German Empire could have dominated the 20th century, preventing the collapse of monarchies and perhaps stifling the rise of Soviet communism by crushing the Bolsheviks early on. The absence of World War if Germany wins WWI, the conditions that allowed Adolf Hitler to rise, the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, and economic collapse never happen. There is no Nazi Germany. However, this does not mean the world is peaceful. Instead of a war against fascism, the mid-20th century might have seen a clash of empires. A victorious Germany, a surviving British Empire, and a divided North America would vie for global dominance. The Holocaust might not happen, but the global acceptance of racial hierarchy, supported by the existence of the CSA and colonial empires, would persist much longer. The moral awakening regarding human rights that followed 1945 might be delayed by decades. However, if a second global war did occur, the CSA would likely be a hotbed for far-right ideologies. The Golden Circle Movement, a plan to expand the slave empire into Cuba, Mexico, and Central America might have been realized. The CSA could have become the primary antagonist of the Western Hemisphere, a totalitarian ethnostate expanding southward. Economics and culture economically, the two nations would diverge sharply. The North, USA, forced to be self-reliant, would accelerate its industrialization, becoming a factory fortress. It would be richer, more urban, but culturally militaristic and paranoid. The South, CSA, relying on agriculture and raw material exports, would likely stagnate. Without the diverse immigration that fueled American innovation, immigrants would avoid a slave state. The CSA would suffer from brain drain. By the 21st century, the CSA might resemble a resource-rich but underdeveloped nation, with extreme wealth inequality between the plantation aristocracy and the lower classes. Culturally, the influence of American soft power Hollywood, jazz, rock and roll would be severely diminished. A divided America would not export culture. It would export tension. The internet, the moon landing, and the digital revolution, all driven by the massive resources of a unified superpower, might have been delayed or developed elsewhere, perhaps in Berlin or London. The modern era. If we look at the map today in this alternate timeline, we would not see a United States of America that acts as the world police. We would see a fragmented continent. The USA might be a rigid socialist-leaning industrial republic. The CSA might be a crumbling oligarchy facing constant internal slave rebellions or civil rights insurgencies, sanctioned by the international community. Global politics would be multipolar. Without a single American superpower to counter the Soviet Union, if it formed, or China, the world would be a complex web of regional alliances. Democracy as the standard form of government might be less common, with monarchies and military juntas surviving longer. Conclusion: the victory of the South would not just have been a political change. It would have been a civilizational shift. It would have validated the concept that a nation could be founded on the specific principle of inequality. It would have neutered the American experiment, turning the land of the free into a cautionary tale of division and failure. We often take the unity of the United States for granted, assuming its rise to power was inevitable. But this alternate history reveals that the U.S. status as a superpower was forged in the fire of the Civil War. Without that Union victory, the 20th century would have been a darker, more fractured, and profoundly different era for the entire human race. The world we know exists only because the South lost. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, learned something new, or simply want to see more content like this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and reach more people. And if you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.